Hello, everybody. This is Randy Nordby, for those of you who don't know me. Hopefully you've seen me around a little bit. I try to do a lot of teaching. I'm pretty involved in the CFA Level 3 program, and it's actually something I really love what I do, and I'm really glad to have an opportunity to talk to you a little bit today about private wealth management. First thing you got to realize about private wealth management, and this is the hardest part. I talk to so many candidates that struggle with the constructed response in private wealth management, and it doesn't have to be that way. What we do at Kaplan, we really give you a repeatable, scalable process, and I really want you to key on that term, process. Now, the other thing that I have to caution you on, because you're level 3 candidates, typically you're a little bit more experienced, you're a little bit more senior, and a lot of you have a lot of experience. Here's the biggest problem. You have to forget what you do for a living. You cannot use methods and training and techniques that were given to you on the job or that you learned. You have to focus on the CFA Institute curriculum. So when we say there's a CFA world and then there's the real world, it's so true, and it shows up so many times in constructed response. So again, I tell my candidates and people that I work with, you cannot work too many private wealth management problems. You'll never figure out a process if you just read these things. You're going to have to work problems, you're going to have to work constructed response, and you need to take this seriously, because at the end of the day, if you don't crush private wealth management and institutional wealth management, you're going to have a really difficult time passing the exam, and then you're going to see us next year. And I'd love to see you at the Institute, not on a training video. Okay, so let's go ahead and get going. First thing I want you to do, I want to give you a process of what you can use to be successful in private wealth management. So I want you to get in the habit, every time you see a private wealth management problem, I want you to think about it this way. So first of all, I want you to think TTLLURR. So what is that? That's time horizon, taxes, liquidity, any legal issues, anything unique. And then we get into risk and return. And remember, when we're dealing in private wealth management, you've got to think of risk in two components. It's got to be ability to bear risk, and it's got to be willingness to bear risk. So when you think of your client, you need to think about this. So let's dive into this a little bit deeper. So ability to bear risk, what are we really focusing on here? You're focusing on time horizon and liquidity. You know, those pretty much drive that ability to bear risk. I want you to think willingness is more emotion. You know, how does the person feel? You know, maybe they lost some money at some point. You know, unfortunately for our clients, if they've been with you for a while, they've been through with you for the financial crash of 2000 to 2001. You went through the Great Recession of 2007, 2009. These clients, it's not unlikely that they may be a little bit gun shy. And we're going to get into a strategy that the CFA Institute is going to teach you in the material how to help with these people that have these emotional biases. And it's going to be called goals-based investing. And also mental accounting. You know, you'll see a lot of overlap in the material. So again, when you look at a problem, I want you to think about TTLLURR. And then for risk, I want you to break it down into ability and bear risk and willingness to bear risk. Again, that's for private wealth. If this were institutional wealth, we're not so worried about willingness to bear risk. Institutions don't have feelings, but people certainly do. So again, I want you to focus on what are they giving you in the constructed response problem, what facts are they giving to you, and I want you to stick to what you've been taught by the CFA reading and for our courses that we give you the material. Don't think about how your boss wants you to do it. Don't think about what you do in the real world. The whole point is pass the exam, get your life back, and then do whatever you want, and then all of a sudden you can say hi to your family members who miss you. So let's go ahead and knock this out. and let's really focus on, I want you to think about getting 80% of the private wealth management questions correct in the morning. In fact, if you could even get higher than that, that's great. So let's really nail this, and let's focus, and let's get some points. Remember, this is an Easter egg hunt. To pass this exam, you don't have to score 100. Most likely, you just have to beat the person next to you. It's kind of like hunting bear. You know, you don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to pretty much outrun the person next to you at the exam. And it's very similar. Okay, so let's move forward. So again, this whole purpose of what we believe in Kaplan, we want to give you the information to focus on the exam, score the points that you need, pass the exam, and get your life back. So here's what you need to do. And notice, must do the following to pass this exam. So first of all, you're going to have to be familiar with and understand a large number of potential issues that may apply in a given situation. And again, these are covered in the Swisher notes and the CFA readings. Again, you cannot do too many of these problems. Now, how are you going to be familiar with a number of potential issues? It means you've got to work a large number of these problems, okay? This is a contact sport. You cannot just work one or two. I would say 10, maybe even 15. Go back and look at the last few exams. Look at this year's exams. Dig through these. Now, don't go too far back. I get calls sometimes, hey, I got a 1985 exam. Should I know? I don't know what this is. Guess what? The material changes. I would caution you, try to not go back more than 3 years. That's about as far back. If you need more, sure, but try to maximize everything you can get your hands on for this year and the last few years, and go back to 3 years. Okay, this is probably the most important thing. You've got to carefully read and understand the facts of the case. Now, it seems so simple. Hey, carefully read and understand. I don't know what happens when our typical candidate gets to the exam, but there's two things that candidates seem to tell me. Number one, they have trouble pulling out the necessary facts. So how are you going to do that? Again, I want you to go through a process. You're going to write TTLLU, RR, and then you're going to start defining these things and write little notes next to these things as you go through the problem. Because then when you go back to review your answers, you've already got the gist of the problem. Everything's laid out. You can save time. You don't have to reread it. But the first time, take a breath, slow down. Don't all of a sudden jump right into the answer. Think before you write. That's really the most important thing. And candidates ask me, should I do it in pencil? Should I do it in pen? Well, first of all, always check with the CFA Institute. Make sure they haven't changed it. But I actually encourage my candidates to use pen, because if you're using pen, it might just stop you for a second to make sure that you really are covering the key points and you're not just writing to write. Okay, so carefully read and understand. So that means slow down, really take the time. They're giving you the information you need to know. You just have to make sure that you're focused enough to understand it. Okay, another thing, there is a process at work here. And this is not just an ad hoc process. I want a repeatable, scalable process. And guess what? You can do this. Again, TTLLU, RR, and we're going to give you a lot of tips at Kaplan how to help you pass the exam. So two things that really struck out to me. You need a process. So my idea in the constructed responses, and this was taught to me by another Kaplan instructor a number of years ago, there's really two methods that you can use to make sure you go through the exam and at least attempt to answer all questions. Number one is what I used when I was preparing for the exam, and I call it bank time. And what does that mean? Hey, if the problem is 26 minutes, I look at my watch, oh, it's 9 a.m. At 9:26, I am moving on from this problem. I don't care how far I've gotten, I'm done. 927, I'm moving on to the next problem. Another method that a lot of candidates like is the half skip. So what does that mean? Let's say you look at a problem and it's 26 minutes and you literally have no idea how to solve this problem. You've never seen it before, you're not familiar, it was in that one section you were really weak in. So why sit there and use 26 minutes if you absolutely have no idea how to answer it? Guess what? If you can't answer it in 13 minutes, or at least some parts of it in 13 minutes, skip it. Go to the next question. So here's what typically happens. And candidates tell me, they're like, I don't know how I did on the exam. I don't know if I passed. Well, I was asked the simple question, how many did you leave blank? Well, I only got through half the questions. Well, guess what? Even if everything else that you wrote was correct, you scored about 50% in the morning. You know, that means at the end of the day, you're going to have to score most likely in the 90s in the afternoon to even have a chance of most likely passing. So I don't like those odds. So why do most candidates fail the exam? It's simple. They run out of time. You know, I would bet you if Einstein were still alive today, he could prove to you that CFA time goes faster than real time. And I'm telling you, you'll get to that exam, you start writing a few things. If you don't have a process in play, you'll be on question 3 out of 10, and you're 2 hours into the exam, you only have an hour left. You're not going to pass the exam. So again, practice, practice, practice. Hey, how are you getting through the exam? What are you doing? Try bank time. Again, if it's a 26-minute problem, look at your clock. You're moving on in 26 minutes. If that's too granular for you, try the half skip. But again, we want you to maximize your possible points. Get credit for all the sacrifices that you made. And quite frankly, give the graders something to grade on questions 6 through 10. You know, you do not want half your exam to be a 0. Unfortunately, you won't like the results. So again, I cannot stress this enough. This is a process. So that means you're going to have to practice. And again, I don't believe you can work too many of these problems. Practice, practice, practice. And the funny thing, you go back and review these old exams, and you know what? It's the same question over and over and over. They're just twisting it around a little bit and adding some nuances. If you work enough problems, you're like, oh, I remember that. That's the 2016 problem 7, part B. I remember that problem. And I'm not telling you to memorize problems, but you'll start noticing there's a lot of similarities here. But if you don't work enough problems, you'll never have a repeatable, scalable process, and you're going to hurt yourself on the exam. Okay, next thing I want you to think about is I want you to construct a written answer for the constructed response questions. So if they're asking you about time horizon, why are you talking about liquidity? If they're talking about, basically what is a unique situation, why are you talking about legal issues? So again, I need you to focus on answer the question that they ask. It sounds so simple, but it's not. We get distracted, we start thinking of things, our mind starts going different places. You gotta focus on just answer the question that the CFA Institute asks and answer it to the best of your ability using all of the tools and skills that you have, and you'll be much, much, much happier as you go through the process. Okay, another thing. This is fascinating, and for those of you who haven't done this, talk to some of your friends that have taken level 3. And basically what a lot of people tell you is that a lot of candidates find this material extremely frustrating because it doesn't meet their personal sense of consistency. Well, I'm going to stop you right there. In all honesty, because it doesn't meet your personal sense of consistency, it doesn't matter. You're going to do what the CFA Institute wants you to do, and you're going to answer the questions that they want you to do. But more importantly, if you don't work enough problems, it will seem random. But if you work enough problems, you'll start to see, oh, wait a minute. They keep asking me about liquidity. they keep talking about time horizon and ability to bear risk. So we say that actually past answers are quite consistent on the main important issues. If you're having trouble figuring out the consistency, I'm going to propose that you're actually focusing on unimportant information. There are a lot of facts that you are given that you simply don't need. They're distractor information. You need to zero in on the key facts. You need to answer those key facts, and you need to demonstrate that on the exam, pass the exam, and again, pick up the most points you can, pass the exam, get your life back. Okay? So again, for the exam, you must determine the relevant case facts. It doesn't matter what you want to talk about. You need to talk about what the CFA Institute wants you to talk about, and don't waste time. If they're talking about time horizon, there's no reason to be talking about unique cases or any of the other objectives and constraints. Focus on what you're answered, and it's going to take a lot of practice. Okay, so let's talk about investment objectives for who? For private clients. Okay, so for example, individuals and families. Well, guess what? They have a wide range of investment objectives. My personal view is I think in the real world, it's a lot easier to work with institutional clients. They tend to have less conflicting goals. It's more straightforward. You know, as my dad said when I was getting ready to go to college and kind of go into the career world, my dad said, Randy, I want to tell you one thing that should help you out in your life. And I'm going to share that with you. Very meaningful to me. My dad said, people are crazy. And you know what? The more you work with clients, the more you work with people, they are crazy sometimes. I tell the classes that I teach that I actually had a client who refused to let me buy securities that started with the letter A. Why? He just hated the letter A. No reason. So what does that mean? I couldn't buy Apple. I couldn't buy Amazon. I couldn't buy anything that started with a letter A. There was no rational purpose. He just strongly disliked the letter A, and he wouldn't let me purchase it in the securities. Again, you're going to have to deal with a wide range of investment goals and objectives with private clients, and you need to focus on the key points, and you're also going to have to worry about prioritizing those key points, because what you're going to find, sometimes clients have conflicting goals. Hey, I want to have a comfortable retirement, but I also want to maximize the money that I want to give to my children. Oh, and also I want a huge philanthropy gift to my college. It's like, well, wait a minute, which one do you really want? Okay, so we're going to say this, certain investments are going to be difficult to reconcile. So again, wanting to generate a secure retirement and fund charitable projects. Okay, I'm confused. Which one do you really want? You're going to have to help the client figure that out and prioritize those goals. You know, we can't hit 5 different moving targets at once. We got to focus on one, then focus on the next one, the next one, the next one. Okay, so that's how you're going to do this. Again, institutions. I loved working with institutions. They're more likely to have clearly defined objectives. And what it's even better, and especially in today's world, they're usually focused on funding liabilities. Hey, if you're a defined benefit pension plan or insurance company, you have liabilities that you have to meet. Okay, so you're going to build those objectives of the portfolio around funding those liabilities. So again, institutions are more likely to have clearly defined objectives where people, quite honestly, are all over the place, and you can have 2 people that have the exact same situation that have completely different objectives. So people are a little bit more confusing, so you're going to have to dig into it a little bit more. I say you're going to have to do a little bit more work on private wealth just to even have a chance of nailing this on the exam, okay? And the other thing that I always liked about institutional investing, the objectives of institutional clients tend to remain stable over time. Hey, the market goes down a little bit tomorrow. They're not all of a sudden telling you to go in cash. Or, hey, I want to buy this new cryptocurrency. Or, you know, it's much more stable. And honestly, it's different. So if you've never worked both before, you kind of have to take my word for it. But if you have worked with private clients and institutions, you know what I'm talking about. They're different. Okay, so now we're going to get into constraints. So time horizon. Why is there so much focus on time horizon? I want to focus on time horizon because it really impacts that ability to bear risk. If you have more time, hey, if you don't need the money for 40 years, you have the ability to withstand up markets and down markets. I promise you that they're going to come around. And if you think about it, we're going into the 10th year of a bull market. At some point, we're going to have a pullback. If you're retiring next year and the market goes down 40%, you might have some issues about retiring at the level that you want. Okay, so private clients have shorter time horizons compared to institutional clients. Hey, at some point, client, you're going to get sick, you're going to die. Institutions, they might have an infinite time horizon. So what does that mean? That means your ability to bear risk for institutions is most likely going to be higher than it is going to be for private clients. And again, I want you to focus on this time horizon. So what do you have? Well, you're going to have time horizon and liquidity. That's going to influence this ability to bear risk. So the shorter the time horizon limits, that means you're going to have more liquidity, and that means your ability to bear risk is going to go down. Okay, so again, I want you to think, when you think time horizon, I want you to immediately think about ability to bear risk, and I want you to try to think about how does liquidity impact in this as well. Okay, and again, a private client may also have different horizons for different investment objectives. Okay, so you're going to hear this term a lot. Mental accounting, it's also called goals-based accounting. Okay, so I want you to think about this. Yes, it's suboptimal. You're going to end up having 5 or 6 portfolios, and they're not going to be mean variance optimal, most likely. They're not going to pass, Harry Markowitz's idea of what a portfolio should look like, but it'll keep the client invested, and they're more likely to reach those goals, and they're less likely to go to cash, and then 6 years later say, hey, I want to go into the market after there's been a huge run-up. Okay, so I want you to think about prioritizing those different horizons and this idea of goals-based investing. It's going to be very, very important, whereas institutional clients generally just have this single time horizon. So again, we need to understand the differences in order to tackle these problems. Okay, so another thing, let's talk about scale, or another word, size. So private portfolios, guess what? They're typically smaller compared to those of institutional clients, especially if you're comparing it to the Yale or the Harvard endowment. So what I want you to think about, certain asset classes, hey, real estate and alternative investments, they may be unsuitable for a private client because if we buy one of these things, the minimum investment may be so high that that's 100% of their portfolio or 80% of the portfolio. It's too concentrated. So in order to have a properly diversified portfolio, you can't have 80% of your money in alternative investments, okay? Especially one alternative investment. Maybe if you have 20 different alternative investments, maybe then we can make a case to talk about diversification. Okay, taxes. The biggest advice, or say the most important advice that I can give you about taxes, you are not CPAs. Even if you are, you're not for the exam, okay? You are not a tax advisor. If the situation becomes too complex, you're going to tell in the case that they need to seek qualified tax help. They need to see a professional. You are not a tax professional. You are a portfolio manager. You are a professional at building and constructing and monitoring portfolios, not giving tax or legal advice. So taxes are important. Private clients have to pay taxes. Many institutions don't. So what are we doing? We're trying to maximize after-tax returns for clients, okay? So bottom line, if you put a client in an inappropriate investment and give them a lot of tax drag, it's going to hurt their portfolio, it's going to make it harder to reach their goals, and you're likely not to get very many referrals. Okay, the other thing I want you to think about, institutions and endowments, foundations, they have significant tax exemptions that most people can't take. Okay, so let's talk another consideration. Let's get into governance structure. Now, governance structure, this is exactly what you think of governance structure. When I think of governance, the first word that I want you to think about is formal. They're going to most likely have a board of directors and an investment committee. They're also sophisticated investors. So they're not going to have a lot of emotional biases. They're not going to most likely not let you buy a stock that starts with the letter A, like one of my clients did. So again, I want you to think about this governance structure. And if it's more formal, it means that it's more of a process, and they're going to have timely reviews. And just think about governance structure as formal, and that'll help you remember it. Okay, now private clients tend to have less formal investment governance. And this is the big thing. As a private client is probably not hiring a private wealth manager to outperform the market. It's very hard to do that. But what you can add some value is you can actually oversee their account. So you're going to be their governance structure. Now, you're not a formal investment governance structure. You don't have a board of directors or an investment committee, but you can still help this person and oversee their account. And I believe this is how you're going to add value. You're probably not going to outperform the client's benchmark, but you can certainly help them set up appropriate portfolio and help them reach their goals. Okay, investment sophistication. Due to this formal governance structure with institutional investments, they tend to be more sophisticated. Hey, that makes sense. And again, as we talked about this, as my dad said, people can be crazy. So private clients are likely to display emotional biases. Okay, so what does that result in? Suboptimal decisions. Maybe that client that didn't want to buy any stocks that start with the letter A, maybe he wishes he had bought Amazon or Apple when he had the opportunity. Okay, let's talk about regulatory environment. I know this is what everybody wants to talk about, but it's very important. Okay, so guess what? The regulatory environment for private clients and institutional investors is going to vary greatly by jurisdiction. And again, the CFA exam is a global exam. You don't have to know every single rule in the United States or in the whole world, but they're going to give you the information that you need to know, but you just have to remember that it varies. Okay? And we talked about this. There are going to be a lot of facts and figures. Hey, guess what? In some countries, institutional investors and regular investors are similar, and some they're very different. You know, again, just know that they vary, and I don't want to spend a lot of time in this. And please don't start memorizing tax codes or regulatory codes for countries, because it's not going to help you get anywhere. Okay, let's talk about uniqueness. So again, with institutional clients, they tend to not be that unique. And at the end of the day, they don't have all these different investment strategies because of different concerns and backgrounds. So when you're dealing with private clients, I want you to think about they're very likely to be unique. And because they're unique, they actually tend to be more complex. So again, it's not that important that hey, private clients are more unique than institutional clients. It really depends, and it all varies on who you're working with. But just know from a 30,000 foot level, when you're looking down, private clients tend to be a little bit more unique, actually making them a little bit more complex than with institutional investors. So again, to summarize what we've talked about today, just deal with the facts. What is it in the case that you need to know? What are the key points? remember that strategy, TTLLURR. And I want you to practice a repeatable, scalable process and either bank time or use your half skip. And I don't want you to leave the last half of the questions blank on your constructed response in the mornings. Get the most points you can, follow a process, and practice, practice, practice.